So why don't you go on with the 5 levels of healing, which is really an extraordinary way to sort of view health and place things in the proper context.
This originated really I lived for several years in India and worked also as a medical doctor in India in a sort of very spiritual environment. And I came in contact with the 5 levels of healing through a lecture by an old yogi who presented the 5 levels of healing as a healing model that was developed 12,000 years ago in the Himalayas, in the mountains, and has really been the guiding influence for Tibetan medicine, for traditional Chinese medicine, and for Ayurvedic medicine. And the model simply says that we are not just a physical body, but that we are surrounded and penetrated by 4 other invisible bodies. And after listening to the lecture, it sort of fermented in me for several years, and here's what I made out of it, and I do believe this is very close to the truth. So the first level that we're looking at, of course, is the physical body. This is sort of the summation of our structure, of the biochemistry. It is what we can perceive with our 5 senses. Now, we know that the physical body generates several phenomena that can only be explained with physics that are not visible to our eyes. For example, gravitation. The force of gravity is something we cannot perceive with our eyes because it is an invisible force. And our body also creates electromagnetic fields, and it also creates light emissions that are in the quantum range. That means per second there is very, very small amount of biophotons given off into our field, which are not visible because the density of the radiation is not enough. But these biophotons, as you will hear later in my little discourse, are extremely important in our abilities to sustain health, and I will get into that. And so the second level, the second body that we are surrounded by, I call the energy body. This is simply the playing out of the forces of physics, and there's only 4 forces. There is the electromagnetic force, there's gravity, and there's the strong force and the weak force, and all of these create a field around us which has high levels of sophistication, and it is part of what regulates our physical body. And I'll get into that in a moment. I just want to give sort of the overview. Techniques that work on the second level, for example, would be acupuncture or German neural therapy, or the work with magnetic fields and so forth. And then there is the third level. The third level I call the mental body. The mental body is that instrument by which we record all of life's events. Now, people always ask me, well, isn't that the brain? Isn't the brain where the memory is at? And I would have to say no. In modern neuroscience, it is known that the brain has a number of circuits that explain short-term memory, but we do not have the circuitry for long-term memory. And let me give you a quick example of that, because it was exciting in my development. This was a patient with Alzheimer's disease who was in the hospital. He had already lost, according to the MRI, 40% of his brain mass, which is usually the point at which an Alzheimer's patient dies. And his daughter asked me, she knew that I was experimenting with hypnosis and hypnotherapy techniques. She asked me if I would go there and try to put him under hypnosis. And so I did. And this is a man who hasn't spoken in 8 years, who was completely unconscious as far as we could tell. So I put him under hypnosis. In hypnosis, he woke up. So For 2 hours, this man woke up from his stupor and talked completely coherently with his daughter. He remembered every single event of his lifetime, not only from like when he was 3 or 4 years old, but he remembered his birth, he remembered the time before birth, and gave absolute accurate accounts of everything that had happened to him. And we know from a neurophysiological point of view, he did not have those parts of the brain that are usually associated with a memory. And I'm postulating that the place where memory is stored is the biophoton field. It's part of the electromagnetic system around our body. And the brain is nothing else but a receiver that tunes into the memory storage in this field.
Wow, that's intriguing. When did you come up with that understanding or belief?
I'm friends with a famous German physicist, Dr. Fritz Albert Popp.
Oh my gosh, he's the leader in that.
And Dr. Popp is the leader in the field in understanding the biophoton field. And let me give you like a few other sort of pearls that came out of that association. It is known in biology that every cell in the body has over 100,000 biochemical reactions per second. And these biochemical reactions need to be carefully timed and sequenced with each other. And physicists and biochemists and biologists have looked for years, what is the organizing principle that organizes this sophisticated dance of biochemistry in us? And here's the sort of short answer of it. The DNA in each cell vibrates at a frequency of several billion hertz, which is unfortunately the same range at which the modern cell phone communication systems work at. And the DNA contracts and extends like a coil several billion times per second. And every time it contracts, it squeezes out one single biophoton. And this biophoton, a light particle, and that photon contains all the information which genes are active in the moment, which ones are transcribed, which ones are methylated and silenced in this moment. It carries the information of everything going on in the DNA. And we know from physics that one single biophoton is able to carry more than 4 megabytes of information, one single photon, and communicates this information outside the body to other biophotons, which path it crosses, and then through various phenomena that are well understood in physics, like through coherence, through modulating the frequencies, through modulating the amplitude, and through a property of biophotons called squeezed light. All the photons that are emitted from the body communicate with each other. We are surrounded by a light field that is highly, highly structured and is the actual carrier of what we call long-term memory. And this light field is what regulates the activity of our metabolic enzymes. So the information transfer on biophotons is bidirectionally. That means the DNA sends information out, and on the same photon, the information of all the other biophotons from the body in this moment is broadcasted back to the cell. And the actual light receiver in the connective tissue and in the cell is the tubulin. And that becomes important for our other work, because tubulin is a light conductive molecule that is so densely spread in our tissues that if you would strip a body of everything other than tubulin, we would still recognize each other. And so the tubulin receives the light impulse and conducts it at the speed of light throughout the body to every place in the body. And the metabolic enzymes, for example, in the mitochondria, are lined up carefully in sequence on tubulin molecules. So this light information is translated in the inside the cell into activating or inactivating our metabolic enzymes. And now, here's a couple of points that are important in this. One, the toxin that at the very lowest concentration of all the toxins ever tested destroys the tubulin is mercury. Mm-hmm. Mercury has an absolute unique place in this, that it disrupts the light transmission from our biophoton field to the cell, to the metabolic enzymes. That means it disconnects the intelligent organizing force that organizes our biochemistry. And of course, the other aspect is that we're talking about the light body, that the light body can be influenced with light. Mm-hmm. That is, would be the natural tool to work with to modulate the activity in the biophoton field. And so in the last few years, I've started using more and more tools that work with light. So these are just two points I wanted to make. Now this is all at second and third level jargon. Yeah, so we don't just exist on the basis of biochemistry. There is a large part of our life force, and what we deal with in health and illness has to do with physics. And then we have a fourth level. The fourth level is also what I call the dream body, or the intuitive body. This is sort of the realm of the shaman, of the spiritual, metaphysical experiences. And the tool that I use on this level is the family constellation work. The family constellation work is based on the observation that trauma and unresolved conflicts that happened in the ancestry, in the lineage of our grandparents, great-grandparents. If there's any unresolved issue, it doesn't simply go away with their death, but it plays out in a variety of different ways in later generations, and often becomes the source and the causative event of illness 2, 3, or 4 generations later. And of course, most people overlook this and can never help patients. And so one of my major contributions maybe is that I use this work for all the autistic children that come to me, to my practice. I see quite a bit now, and find that the vulnerability that these children have is not only explained based on the vaccine issue and the mercury issue and the electrosmog exposures, the things that we know are for sure contributing factors to autism, but it also has a base in the family history. And when we can resolve issues in a family history, there is often magical improvements in these children. You know, this is like 3-4 generations later that the effects of a trauma play out. And so by healing the trauma in the past, the children are healed now, and this is just a wonderful, wonderful work.
So we talked about the lower 4 levels now, and then of course there is the 5th level, which is the connection of the individual to God, to the divine. And it's a level I don't think any therapist has any business doing anything with. It's a individual, it's private, it's personal. And certainly I do not go there as people, but I'm aware that that level is of course the most important part of what guides us and what makes us tick. And so the important thing about the 5 levels is that illness can originate on any of these lower 4 levels. And when you treat an illness on a level other than where the origin is of it, you never lastingly get the illness well. And so you can either treat an illness symptomatically. That means you treat the fallout, so to say, from the origin of the illness symptomatically, which is very lucrative financially, because then you have to treat the patient every day of their life.
That's somewhat the model of the drug companies.
Exactly. But if you actually find the origin of the illness and intervene on that level, very often you succeed in that the illness lastingly goes away.